Every single time.
In this guide, we're going to be checking out all the different enemy types and bosses in Resident Evil Requiem. Almost 30 years after the original outbreak, Leon's going through a very different kind of midlife crisis, being plagued with the long-term effects of T-virus exposure called Raccoon City Syndrome. That's not going to stop him from John Wicking his way through another pile of monsters during another dramatic series of events though, eager to hunt down the new bad guy, Victor Gideon, and uncover the secrets of a mysterious umbrella project called Elpis. But he's not taking all the spotlight this time, because he's kind enough to share the horrors with FBI analyst Grace Ashcroft, who's a bit of a noob to all this zombie slaying stuff, and will therefore need to tackle situations in a bit of a different manner, sneaking around the place collecting blood to craft bullets, somehow, and using a newly acquired hemolytic injector to turn the infected into sauce. Despite the fact that everyone still seems to be using typewriters, and some of these computers would probably struggle to run the original Doom game, our journey takes place in the year of 2026, and T-virus zombies are just as relevant as they've always been. But this time around there's a bit of a twist, as the vast majority of the ones you'll encounter in Requiem have actually been exposed to a mutated strain of the virus, allowing them to retain memories of their past lives, which gives them unique behaviour patterns and skill sets. I mean, they're still going to have all the same sort of problematic traits as normal T-virus zombies, being extremely violent, cannibalistic bullet sponges which will casually wander around the place while their brains are hanging out. But this mutant strain definitely helps to spice things up a bit, generally giving these guys more personality, by making them a tad smarter, allowing them to speak, even giving them the ability to pick up and use weapons, with some of those weapons being really friggin' big. One place that's absolutely swarming with these zombies is the Rhodes Care Centre, and let's just say there isn't very much care getting on in here. Rhodes Hill is a sanatorium that's been taken over by former Umbrella researcher Victor Gideon, who's gone and turned the site into his own shady research facility. And by his own orders, the mutated T-virus strain has been unleashed upon the place, causing absolute pandemonium in the process, with the infected patients wandering the halls, along with all the newly infected staff and doctors. Some of these zombies are sensitive to bright lights, and if you start playing around with the light switches, then they're going to get a bit stressed out and come shuffling over to turn them off again. This means that, at the push of a button, you can manipulate their movements and lead them into other areas without having to deal with them head on, or waste any of your valuable ammunition. The care centre's cleaners are still very determined to do their jobs and scrub the place spotless of all the blood splattered around everywhere, completely unaware that they're one of the main reasons why there's such a bloody mess in the first place. Throwing a tantrum and smashing your face into a broken mirror probably doesn't really help the situation. Speaking of making a bloody mess, there's also a doctor with a freaking chainsaw running around too. Not sure why there's a chainsaw in the care hospital, but considering the twisted nature of the place, we probably shouldn't be too surprised. Well, Leon's been in this situation quite a few times before, and it's always a bit of an awkward dance. There's one wrong move, and he's going to be having a very long lie down in a red puddle. Taking the doctor out's not going to be the end of the chaos though, as the nearby zombies are smart enough to pick this thing up and use it against you as well. Or at least try and use it and fail miserably. It turns out that Leon's also finally figured out how chainsaws work too, and for the first time ever, he's able to live out his Dr. Salvador fantasy and go on a bit of a rampage himself. I'm sure the cleaners are going to love that. Chainsaws might be one thing you'll need to avoid getting chopped up by, ginormous butcher utensils are going to be another. Of course, this place is swanky enough to have its own bar and casino, not to mention a banquet hall that's currently serving some pretty questionable food. The head chef of the place has obviously turned into a zombie too, just like all the other poor buggers here, though he just so happens to be an absolutely massive bloke armed with an absolutely massive knife, still intent on performing his duties by preparing meals in the kitchen and aggressively hacking away at these nasty piles of meat. Because this guy is such a tank, he's going to be a trickier zombie to take down than most of the others, and so it might be best to sneak around the chef and use stealthier tactics instead of going in guns blazing. Unless you've got one of those zombie bursting injectors spare. Yeah, those things are practically overkill. As you explore the care centre even further, it won't be long until you hear a bit of an eerie wailing sound echoing down the corridors. Kinda like one of those argumentative cats that you tend to hear outside at 3 o'clock in the morning. The mutated T-virus strain has given a couple of the patients boosted vocal cords, though it just so happened to give this ability to the most eccentric zombies in the whole of the bloody building. You know, the ones that are literally diagnosed with main character syndrome. They like to wander around the place singing along to themselves, randomly screaming their heads off just because they can. They can also walk around in heels too, which is kind of impressive. The voices will alert nearby zombies of your presence, and their shrieks will also send us flying backwards to inflict damage, and massively affect our ability to aim, potentially making these girls very disruptive and very problematic in certain situations. But the complete opposite to loud, obnoxious singers is this poor dude with a migraine who just wants a bit of peace and quiet. Some of the patients that are wrapped up in bandages definitely aren't having a very good time. Their ears are extremely sensitive to sound, and they'll become brutal savages towards anything that breaks the silence. Nothing quite says shut the f*** up like getting smacked over the head with an IV stand. If someone's being too boisterous, well, these guys are going to take it very personally, forcing you to tread carefully around them, trying your best not to wind them up. Unless of course you want to make some noise on purpose and send the dude into a frantic hissy fit, which can be a good way to take care of other enemies by lobbing empty glass bottles in their direction. But anyway, these are just some of the main examples of how the mutated T-virus strain has affected the people in the Rhodes Hill Care Centre. Oh yeah, and then there's also this absolute nutcase on a bulldozer. Who could forget that guy? While the surgeons at Rhodes Hill attempted to play God, the experimented on a pair of very unfortunate brothers, removing parts of their brain which basically got rid of their feelings of fulfillment. So along with being infected up to the eyeballs with a mutant T-virus strain, these zombies now had an insatiable hunger, impossible to satisfy. Which, let's be honest, is a pretty crappy thing to give something that likes to eat human flesh. Well, the Chunkers certainly had a rough time because of this, basically turning him into a gigantic wall of fat with a face like a sack of spanners covered in hemorrhoids. These guys are blown up to a ridiculously huge size, to the point where they really struggle to get around the facility, simply because they can't fit through the bloody hallways and doors. They'll do just about anything physically possible to grab another meal though, and so they'll chase you around and force themselves through tight spaces, and basically smash the care centre to pieces like zombified wrecking balls, giving you a great reason to run the other way. Although Grace can just simply avoid the chunk most of the time, if she gets sick of it clogging up the hallways, she could always shoot it in the head with some Requiem bullets, or you know, just jab it in the arse with some Ozempic. Leon on the other hand is going to need to take out the other chunk in typical Leon fashion. This guy's a bit too tall to roundhouse kick in the face though, and so you'll have to keep wearing him down slowly with a lot of that firepower instead, blasting it away with bullets while the big doofus barges and squeezes its way around the confines of the attic, frantically chasing you around the place to try and gobble you up. With the care centre being swamped by all sorts of nasty abominations, it won't be too long until you get to meet one of these feral bastards. That new T-virus strain might be able to make a zombie smarter and more sociable, but all that sort of goes out the window when their head just decides to blow up. Turns out that the new strain's also got a pretty bizarre side effect, in the sense that it can cause dormant cells and infected dead people to suddenly become active again, dragging them back to life and throwing them into a state of uncontrollable panic, like they've just woke up 2 hours late for work, only for their heads to violently mutate and burst into this wacky meatball thing. This is very bad news for us, as we're not dealing with a zombie anymore. We've now got to contend with a much more dangerous Blister Head, a very aggressive, resilient creature that soaks up a stupid number of bullets, despite being a pretty awkward thing to actually hit in the first place. They'll dive around the room, doing their best to try and slap your head off, though if you want to put them down for good, then you're going to have to do a bit of blister bursting. Aiming for the head is usually advised here, with hemolytic injectors being all the more useful while you're playing as Grace, if you've got the balls to try and sneak up on them, that is. Over a period of time, a Blister Head's metabolism can go a bit haywire, resulting in a secondary metamorphosis, thus causing the thing to mutate even further. It's certainly not the first time we've seen a nasty Resident Evil monster transform into something even nastier, with the Blister Borne being a much rarer enemy type in the game, which sort of acts like a mini-boss due to its greater strength and power. Aside from having a mouth like a rock grinder and generally looking like something that the family dog spat out, these things are also covered in bright orange pulsating cysts. And we all know the golden rule of survival horror games. If the monster's got a brightly coloured blob on its body, then that blob will probably need to be popped. Taking out the weak spots is the easy part, because then you've got to deal with the aftermath, because those cysts are going to burst into showers of highly infectious gunk, releasing spores into the air which will force all of the nearby zombies to mutate into those much more dangerous Blister Heads, making the fight much more hectic in the process. So the more you weaken the big lad, then the more chaotic things are going to get, giving you a lot more to think about than just the Blister Borne itself, who's not going to go down until the last blob on its body has finally been destroyed. Navigating through the darkness, being hunted down by a giant demon in a dress, is definitely up there with some of the series' most tense scenarios. There's always that one monster in a Resident Evil game that tends to push the horror element to the next level, and in Requiem, that monster is the girl. This thing acts in a slightly different way to most of the other stalker-type enemies you'll have seen in the past. As she's extremely sensitive to bright lights, which seem to corrode her skin, she can crawl around through the massive ceiling holes, slinking off into the shadows to move between different areas. Though if she does manage to spot you creeping around the place, better get running if you want to keep your head attached. But what the hell is this thing, and why is it lurking around in the care centre? Well, if you haven't played the game and you're not too bothered about minor spoilers, this monster is yet another evil experiment gone horribly wrong. A genetically engineered clone called Marie, i.e. Subject 170, who was injected with a cocktail of infectious zombie blood. Doing that probably wasn't the smartest idea, as it caused the clone to become super strong and mentally unstable, giving her the power to burrow out from a cell and scurry off to find a nice dark place to mutate even further. That dark place happened to be the care centre's dingy basement, an ideal area for Marie to hang out, with very limited light sources and plenty of dead bodies lying around to devour whenever she's feeling a bit peckish. What more could a girl want? Though the monster's creepy lair is also on the list of places you've got to go snooping around too. Lucky you. Because it's got very powerful regenerative abilities, guns aren't going to be strong enough to kill this thing. They might slow it down a bit, but that's just about all you're going to get. So you'll be spending a lot of your time sneaking around trying to memorise where the nearest safe room is, just in case Marie decides to drop down from a nearby pipe and cause you to shit your pants. But a bit further on in the game, you'll wind up in a water treatment facility not too far away from the care centre, where Grace decides to grow a massive pair of bollocks by choosing to take the big monster on face to face. Of course, it's another very dark, grimy area, once again putting you at a very big disadvantage. But by slowly tiptoeing around the place, turning levers controlling the station's power, you'll activate the lights one by one, forcing Marie to retreat up to the higher levels. It's here where you can finally put a stop to a reign of terror by activating the panel to open up the ceiling shutters, letting that bright, glorious sunshine come beaming down from the sky above, which is going to cause Marie to get gremlined by melting her down into a big mushy puddle of goop. Lovely. After dealing with the girl, Grace was kinda persuaded to accompany the main bad guys of the game, Gideon and Zeno, who whisked her off to the remains of Raccoon City via helicopter to uncover the mysterious project hiding away there called Elpis. This gives us a very nice excuse to revisit some of Resident Evil 2's most iconic locations, with Leon racing off to save Grace in his fancy new car, returning back to the place where all his horrors began a whole 28 years later, which seems like an appropriate number of years to return to a zombie apocalypse. Well, Raccoon City might have been blown to hell by a high-powered thermobaric bomb, but it's not long until some signs of life start to reveal themselves, though I guess these signs could be seen as a bit of a warning for what's to follow. Huge expanses of the city have been covered by massive webs, stretching out across the buildings, picking up cars, and it sorta looks like Umbrella gave the T-Virus to Peter freaking Parker. Yep, we've wandered into a giant spider nest, and as you might have guessed by the size of those webs, the spiders here are really bloody big. Unless you're from Australia, then they probably look about normal. These things have got a white coloration and a pretty feisty attitude, but they're actually fairly slow creatures that can be blasted away in just a single bullet each. Though I guess their vast numbers and swarming nature can definitely make them a bit of a nuisance, especially when they decide to jump over distance and latch onto your neck with those massive fangs. Unfortunately for you, these puny little things are just the babies, being the offspring to a much nastier monster called the Titan Spinner. Another very risky thing Umbrella decided to do back in the day was infect tarantulas and other big spider breeds with an early strain of the T-Virus, in an effort to try and supersize them and make them viable bioweapons in conflict zones. I guess they sort of accomplished that mission, but giant man-eating spiders probably wouldn't have made brilliant squad mates. They'd be very hard to control, likely to wander off and do their own thing, not to mention the fact that they'd probably end up eating the wrong people. So the project got, squashed. Fast forward to 2026 though, and one of these things has managed to survive and make the ruins of Raccoon City its home. Though it's not going to give Leon a very warm welcome back, as he's right at the top of the menu, practically chasing him around the place, which will eventually lead to a big boss fight in one of the crumbling buildings. There isn't much space to move around in here, which isn't helped out by the Titan Spinner being the size of a friggin' elephant. But there are a couple of places we can shoot him to deal some good damage. Inside the mouth, whenever it opens up wide, along with that nasty yellow blister on its arse. The limited space you've got to evade the big beastie forces you to keep running rings around the building, gunning it down whenever you get a chance, while being careful not to get sneaked up by its pesky babies. If it gets a bit fed up of chasing you around the place though, it might decide to start camping at one of the windows, waiting for you to walk past to conduct an ambush like the devious monster it is. After enough pain's been dealt though, Leon's going to show us just how sharp that hatchet really is by demonstrating it on the spider's exoskeleton head. knocking the big pest down to the floor below, thus allowing him to finish the spinner off with one final smack to the gob. So we're back talking about zombies again, because surprise surprise, the bomb didn't kill them all, and there's still an absolute buttload of them shambling around in Raccoon City. Which is probably a good thing, as otherwise we'd have barely anything to shoot, and the game would be boring as hell. But the ones over here are a bit different to the freshly infected faces of Rhodes Hill, as the vast majority of these guys have been around for many years, lying dormant with the virus still in their system since the original outbreak back in 1998, giving them a much more typical post-apocalyptic vibe. They can even crawl out of the ground now. With that said, many of these guys have also been infected with that mutant strain too, basically making them hybrids. They're not going to remember very much about their past lives though, because their brains are too far gone, hence why they're not very chatty. But they will retain enough knowledge to wield weapons and throw stupidly large gas tanks through the air. You might be wondering why some of them look like they've just wandered out of a Mad Max convention, and that's because they would have been trying to survive the outbreak using makeshift armour. We can see them using improvised weapons to fend off their infected neighbours, like this dude who looks a bit like the Grim Reaper. And some of them have even managed to find some functioning chainsaws, which isn't too much of a problem because at least it gives us an opportunity to snatch it off them and have a bit of fun with it ourselves. Which is easier said than done when we're being challenged by one of the more hardcore zombies who likes to wear a spiky helmet. This sort of takes quick headshots out of the equation, generally making these variants much trickier to kill. Which isn't a very good thing when they happen to be holding something that can rip you in half. Because the BSAA were operating in the quarantine zone of Raccoon City, this means that some of their troops can be found here as well. But there's a catch, they've also been infected with that mutant T-virus strain too. So not only have we got to take on zombie soldiers wearing body armour, but we've also got to take on zombie soldiers that can remember parts of their military training. At least the basic parts, like how to reload a gun and squeeze a trigger. These guys can only just about stand up, so managing the recoil of a machine gun might be out of the question. Most of the bullets are just going to be sprayed all over the environment and into the sky. It's kind of like watching your grandparents try and play Call of Duty. But the zombies aren't really going to be too bothered about wasting ammunition, just so long as they can hit you with some of those bullets, which still deal an absolute ton of damage. You've also got to watch out for the ones holding live grenades, which are going to go boom if you let them get too close. At least you've got a pretty obvious target to aim for here. And then of course, we've got the mortar zombie, otherwise known as the Bastard. These BSAA units have been deployed to man the artillery cannons dotted around on the city's rooftops, and they're going to keep dropping bombs on your head with annoyingly good precision, generally being a pain in the arse and forcing you to keep running undercover to avoid being blown to pieces. Garmr is another bioweapon manufactured by the Connections, being an upgrade from Umbrella's Cerberus project. Basically a beefed up dog with a massive tongue that sort of looks a bit like the Colmeos from Resident Evil 4. Victor Gideon unleashes a whole pack of these things to go chase Leon down while he's riding around on a motorbike he found, giving Leon a very nice opportunity to show everyone how much of a badass he is, able to do drive-bys on the Garmr while performing crazy bike tricks, zooming around on the top of buildings at high speed like he's in a Fast and Furious movie. These bioweapons supposedly cost $30 million each, and they're getting gunned down in about 10 bullets by a sick 49-year-old man on a bike, but at least they look kinda cool. Bit of a shame that we don't get to see them anywhere else in the game. So the Raccoon City Orphanage was actually a secret testing facility run by the Umbrella Corporation, and it was the home of some of their darkest projects, which we'll get to see firsthand in a flashback sequence taking us back to the year of 1990, 8 years before the T-virus outbreak in the city. A young girl called Chloe wakes up in here to find the other kids have gone on a bit of a killing spree, wiping out all the research staff while attempting to break free from the building. These are known as the Series 60 kids, a bunch of clones that were all part of Oswell Spencer's memory transfer project. Though the latest experiment on them seems to have gone a bit tits up, as it's given the children superhuman strength and regenerative abilities, and it's also given them the personality of mindless murderous robots. Under the golden rule of survival horror games, if it's got glowing red eyes then you probably shouldn't trust it. These creepy ass bald kids aren't just out to rise up against their captors though, as they'll just about try and kill anything that isn't one of them. Including Chloe, who happens to be a Series 70 clone, showing better signs of stability to the experiment. Chloe's got to try and escape the orphanage without being spotted by the children, but she actually ends up uncovering a secret entrance to the Ark, one of Umbrella's many underground labs. It's here where she'll discover the harsh truth about her origins, also being a lab-grown experiment too, much like the other children, only for her to be captured by the scientists in the Ark and dealt with like another failed test subject.
We need to get rid of her.
Going back forwards to present day, and this nicely leads us over to a character that Grace meets in the Rhodes Hill Care Centre, and one of the only things in there that doesn't feel the urge to bite her head off. A little girl called Emily can be found locked away in a cell, isolated from the rest of the sanatorium. And well, let's just say she looks an awful lot like Chloe, despite this now being 36 years after the incident in the orphanage. It's safe to say that Emily is another one of those clones from the Ark, brought to the care centre for further research, much like her sister Marie, who was stuck in the cell next door. And we all know what happened to her. All of those cruel experiments have blinded poor Emily, who now has to resort to Braille in order to read. And being the nice person that Grace is, she manages to free the girl from her cell, and then drag her around the zombie-infested hellhole to solve a puzzle involving Braille. They both escape the hospital together, but Emily gets severely injured in a helicopter crash, putting her in a pretty dire state. She momentarily dies, but gets resuscitated by Grace, but because her DNA is so screwed up from all the constant T-virus testing, a really bad reaction occurs, triggering a wild mutation, which basically turns Emily into a giant peanut. Along comes Leon to save the day again, intervening with the situation by gunning the monster down before Grace gets her head knocked off by its thrashing claws. She doesn't want Leon to shoot Emily, but Grace doesn't really get a choice in the matter, as he's gonna shoot her anyway. But definitely not in her vitals. Now feeling like a failure, unable to save Emily, Grace wanders off from the scene dejected, only to be convinced by Gideon and Zeno to go with them both to Raccoon City. This is the part where we finally get to go on a bit of a nostalgia trip, by heading back over to the crumbling ruins of the RPD. While we're wandering around reminiscing about Resident Evil 2, Leon's exploring the building, trying to find Grace, generally gathering clues on where he should be heading next. But Grace is actually already here, having a chat with Zeno about her origins in the other room, with him showing her footage of the clones and the events which happened in 1990. Time for Leon to pop on over to save the day again. But before he manages to do so, Zeno's pet Tyrant comes crashing down from the floor above, as Grace gets picked up and taken away to the Ark. Now we've got to contend with a rampaging Tyrant for the second time in the police station. Leon knows what it's like to get punched in the face by these guys, and he's not exactly thrilled about the idea of it happening again. So he's got to try and escape the RPD while being hunted down by the angry bioweapon, as it smashes its way through the walls and marches down the hallways in typical stompy fashion. After leaving the RPD and heading through Kendo's gun shop, it's no surprise to see that our Tyrant friend has decided to follow us too. Though it's a bit of an inconvenience that he's also found a crashed military chopper full of high explosive missiles. Well, one of these missiles gets shot by Leon, while the daft bugger's waving it around above his head. But as we should probably know by now, Tyrants and explosions don't usually mix very well, as it can destroy their power limiter, forcing them to mutate into those much more powerful Super Tyrants, which is exactly what happens here. Now you're left to duke it out with this guy in a pretty narrow space, trying to avoid getting slapped around by that massive claw arm in between him jumping on your head, and using the burnt out cars scattered around the area as throwable projectiles, basically flexing his strength and doing all the sort of stuff you'd expect a Super Tyrant to do. At least he's wearing his heart on the outside now, giving you a nice big target to point your guns at and a pretty nice excuse to whip out the old Requiem gun, slowly whittling down the Tyrant's health to the point where it gets staggered on the floor, giving Leon a great opportunity to hack the living shit out of its heart using his hatchet, allowing him to push on forwards to the orphanage to find the Ark. Getting into the Ark facility isn't going to be a very straightforward task, as to get there, Leon's got to navigate across a really bloody long train that's hanging over a really bloody big chasm, with one of the main entrances to the Ark being situated at the very bottom. If that doesn't seem like enough danger for us, our journey is about to be rudely interrupted by a gang of vines bursting through the windows, as an ugly looking flower starts taking a chomp at us in the middle, which basically leads to us getting a fast track ticket to the lower levels of the chasm, with the train being too damaged to stay suspended. Yep, that's right. Capcom's really throwing the member berries at us now, as not only have we just taken down a freaking Tyrant, one of Resident Evil 2's most infamous monsters, but we've now been thrown into a situation with Plant 43, another bioweapon that featured in that game too. It turns out that some idiot accidentally released this creature while it was being transported, causing it to infest the area around the Ark entrance and completely engulf the lower levels, constantly growing and mutating as the many years passed it by. Well, I guess that kinda rendered this Ark entrance a bit useless, but because Leon's chosen to take the scenic route, he's got to navigate through a network of root systems while battling against a load of angry flower buds, like the one that attacked you in the suspended train. The closer you get to the Ark, the bigger the roots are going to get, and this is mainly because you're approaching the bioweapon's core, basically acting like the mother plant controlling the rest of her seedlings. Because Leon doesn't have access to any special herbicide mixtures this time, he's going to brute force his way through the big plants by lighting that main flower up and trying to dodge the 2 vine arms that come crashing down to smush him into the ground. It's a pretty simple fight considering the size of this bloody thing, though bullets don't seem to be doing enough to get rid of it for good. So it's a good job that someone decided to leave a crate full of high explosive gas canisters next to its head, which should definitely come in handy after the big plant knocks them all down, while it's having a stroppy tantrum. Now we can head on over to the Ark entrance while that plant is no longer blocking the route. Lo and behold, an absolutely massive door awaits us. We've finally reached the secret Ark facility underneath Raccoon City and the location of the mysterious Elpis project. That's not going to be the only thing in this huge laboratory though. As you might have guessed, some of the test subjects in there have escaped from their cozy little resting chambers, and we've now got these marshmallow zombies to deal with, who've also been infected with the mutant T-virus strain too. In fact, we can see that these poor bastards have been experimented on quite a lot. They're covered in scars, looking like they've had organs removed, some of the limbs look like they've been taken off and reattached, and then of course the obvious thing, the skin's gone all bubbly and pasty, sort of looking a bit like the pale heads in the other games. Thankfully they don't have the same regenerative qualities as the pale heads, otherwise you'd be in for a bit of a rough time, as there's quite a lot of these guys stumbling around down here. Because the Connections aren't very happy about Leon waltzing into their laboratory to cause a load of trouble for them, they've dispatched a team of highly skilled combat units to go and deal with him, a private military force called the Elite Guard, who basically do a lot of the organisation's dirty work. We don't have to kill non-infected humans very often in Resident Evil games, practically never, but now we do, because these troops are going to come storming into the place guns blazing, and they're not going to go down without a proper fight first, forcing you to think a bit more tactically than normal. And keep in mind that these guys can actually aim, surprisingly well. But the leader of the Elite Guard is the Commander, someone who might look a bit familiar. This guy charges at you in one of the tunnels, brandishing his special melee weapon known as the Mortal Edge, basically kicking off a bit of a hatchet swinging contest, with the 2 of you falling through a glass window into the room below. Leon's parrying skills are definitely going to be tested in this fight, with it being a hand-to-hand melee brawl where you basically got to deflect incoming attacks, and lash out with your own hatchet strikes whenever you get a good opportunity. It all starts out as a fair fight, until the Commander starts to feel like he's losing some ground, which is when some of those sneaky tricks start to seep into his tactics, pulling his gun out on you, resorting to flashbangs, and even slashing the nearby pipes to fill the room with smoke, lowering the visibility. You might be bending the rules a bit, but there's nothing to say that you can't bend them either. So if he's dashing around the room with a gun in his hand, then don't be afraid to do it yourself. But the fight ultimately ends with this guy getting stabbed in the neck. The black mark on his hand indicates that he was suffering from Raccoon City Syndrome too, which is a telltale sign that this guy was probably Hunk, a legendary mercenary who was operating during the outbreak in 1998. Zombies certainly aren't the only bioweapons being experimented on in the Ark, as you'll soon be reacquainted with another familiar face. That face happens to be a brain, and that brain happens to belong to the Licker, of course. Enhanced Beta 2 variants, which have been slightly improved to feature a sharper tongue with extra barbs, and boosted agility over those chunkier Beta 1 models. With that said, these things aren't exactly super different to the originals, still retaining a lot of the same characteristics, basically being like blind frog monkeys with no skin. So all the same ground rules still apply when it comes to dealing with these things. Make a load of noise, bad things are likely to happen. Lickers have always been a bit tougher to kill, and they've always been a bit more of a threat, which is why a stealthy approach is usually advised when you're trying to navigate through a room that's absolutely swarming with them. They're far from being invincible though, as even Grace can snuff them out by jabbing them with a hemolytic injector, or by lobbing glass bottles of highly corrosive acid in their direction. Because Leon's got more firepower than a small army, he's probably not going to be too fazed by them. If anything, the Lickers should probably be running away from him. These things can even be used against the Elite Guards by smashing the windows of their hibernation capsules. But do keep in mind that if they don't get killed, they're probably going to come hunting you down afterwards too. There's going to be a lot of story stuff going on in the next section covering the final boss, and although there might have been some possible spoilers so far, this is the point where things get a little bit heavier involving the game's ending, just to let you know. So the main bad guy of Resident Evil Requiem is Victor Gideon, who literally can't look any more like an evil scientist than he already does. He's a former Umbrella virologist who worked on the original T-virus, though he's completely obsessed with Oswell Spencer's legacy, along with using the power of Elpis to control the world. But there's a slight catch to his devious master plan. Elpis is securely locked away in the Ark, and the entire facility will self-destruct if somebody accidentally types in a wrong password to unlock it. This is one of the reasons why Gideon's chosen to do a lot of extensive research on memory transfer and mind control, using the Rhodes Hill Care Centre as a front to do a lot of shifty experiments, mainly taking place in a secret underground lab there, full of dudes hooked up to some sort of giant zombie blood bank. Believing that Grace is the key to unlock Elpis, possibly knowing the password to the terminal, a huge chunk of the plot mainly consists of him tracking her down and bringing her to the Ark, thinking that she's somehow linked with Spencer's memory transfer project with all the little girl clones, with Grace possibly even being a successful test subject due to her being adopted by Spencer himself. That's not the case, of course, and Grace isn't a clone, unbeknownst to Zeno, the guy who's funding Gideon's research. But it turns out that she does know the password anyway, and the reason why she knows this information, along with practically all the answers to Gideon's burning questions surrounding Spencer's legacy, is because they were all on a bloody floppy disk. Good job the computer terminal in the Ark is compatible with such an ancient piece of tech. Well, the cat's out of the bag. Elpis isn't some sort of powerful mind-controlling virus, it's actually an antiviral drug designed to reverse the effects of progenitor-based infections and mutations. Possibly a failsafe, possibly Spencer's redemption. Either way, it's a bit of a slap in the face for Zeno, who's decided to jab himself with the stuff like an idiot, before verifying what it actually was first. Elpis sapped away his powers, proving that it was an antiviral after all, but Gideon twisted the narrative and saw this drug as a potential tool to cause mass chaos, by upsetting the global bioweapons market. Zeno decided to cut ties with Gideon, and Gideon decided to cut Zeno's head off. He's grown a big mutant tentacle arm, which is never a good thing in the Resident Evil world, but at least Leon's now got a cure for his Raccoon City syndrome, allowing him to take Gideon on. But only after he takes the rest of the Elpis files and causes the Ark to self-destruct. Now we're onto the inevitable boss fight with this guy, who spends the vast majority of his time pacing around the place trying to bitch slap you with that tentacle arm. He doesn't exactly have loads of tricks up his sleeve, mainly just resorting to whipping attacks and jabs, with the occasional kick thrown in too every now and then. Though because the arena's so small and because Gideon's usually always within striking range, you're going to need to parry a lot of these attacks with your hatchet, in between gunning him down with your firearms. After a while, Gideon's going to jump up to get the high ground, and somehow absorb the surrounding electricity currents using a bunch of new tentacles that have sprouted out from his back. He'll then go on to zap the room and launch his tentacles forward, like some sort of electrified Dr. Octavius monster, with this being Gideon's special move that's likely going to be the thing that catches you out. He's also going to bring his RPG along to the fight too. That's no problem for Leon though, because of course, he's got a hatchet. Dishing out enough damage to Gideon will cause him to lose control of his virus-ridden body, and flop into the mechanical abyss below, down into the very bottom levels of the Ark. But he's going to do the thing that all Resident Evil villains do, and mutate into a much nastier monstrosity, clawing his way back up to the platform, now in the form of an absolutely gigantic blob of meat. It turns out that Gideon was infected with a Nemesis parasite, which is probably why his mutation might look a little bit familiar. There aren't any stupidly powerful railguns lying around this time though, but that doesn't matter because you're Leon friggin' Kennedy. Guns are going to do just fine against this thing, so long as you take aim at the big glowing bubbles that have popped up all over its body. The monster's going to keep slamming its arms down while you try and do that, forcing you to stay on the move and pay close attention to its body language, eventually causing Gideon to pick Leon up, allowing him to break free, and once again give him a good opportunity to get that hatchet out and start hacking away at something like a madman. Now the last bubble's been burst, and Gideon's practically lost all of his energy to continue, meaning Leon can finish the job with his Requiem gun and put an end to the big stompy meat slug once and for all. Anyway, if you enjoyed this video, then please give it a like, and if you want to see loads of other Resident Evil monsters from other games, then you'll probably want to check out the playlist that's popped up on the screen right now. A very big thanks to all my channel members for your support, it's very much appreciated, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.